We're good. Okay. So, Mr. Ullman, hello.
Low principal fee.
I observed your U.S. government lesson on gerrymandering electoral college and the presidency.
Correct.
I got to see it online.
Separation of powers, different branches.
And that it's the most impressive part of the entire thing was naming every president in order.
Yes, trying to give them a feel for the presidency rather than the current president.
Yes, and then the questions.
Thank you, I appreciate that compliment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Am I fatter than Taft?
Oh, no, he weighed 3 bills plus.
Okay.
Like, at one point, I think tipping the scales at close to 360 or something.
Because they did put a new tub
You
in.
got a special bathtub,
Yeah,
correct?
which is cool.
Yep. I think I mentioned that, maybe not.
Not the
Oh,
tub.
it was a different
I knew the
class.
tub,
Yeah.
but I liked that the class then kind of went with it because I was also wondering stuff.
Gotcha.
I did know the tallest too.
Mhm.
They should have known that, for the record. So let's just get into it. So you can see the Danielson rubric in front of you for domains 2 and 3,
Yes.
which you had early and a chance to go over it.
Yes.
I'm going to highlight some of the positives that I saw, and then basically we're going to have a discussion about the two things.
Okay.
So the first thing that I loved, sit in the front of the room, desk facing them. I don't think you necessarily have to be up moving around. I think it's very personal for you just to be right in front of them, giving them kind of the material as is. Was there any thought process that went into where they sit, or do they get to kind of choose?
They, on day one, I basically tell them you can sit where you want. I don't have a seating diagram. I don't assign seating. I just basically say, look, if there's any type of disruption or, impediment to the process, I'll move you. It's never really been an issue.
Yeah.
So, and that was a small class too, so.
And probably better with older kids to let them pick than like the current ninth graders.
I would agree.
The other part is, I would say that your style, tell me if I'm wrong, more of a storyteller than a lecture.
Yeah, I like that characterization. I think that's accurate for the most part. I don't deny that there's some level of teacher-centered lecture in my approach. I try to make it as painless as possible and as interesting as possible. But yeah, ultimately I like the content to be sort of filtered through me. And, I'm not really in a position to assess myself, I suppose, but I feel like I can explain it in a way that's at least marginally engaging and interesting. I mean, some topics lend themselves to that more than others, but
Yes,
yeah,
and-
I like to think of it more as lecture discussion, but a lot of that's based on, how into the topic they are.
And you probably don't remember because it was a while ago, but they were pretty engaged throughout most of the lesson.
Mhm.
The part that I remember is DeAndre stood up and you guys went back to back.
Yes, we were talking about presidential superlatives, I think,
Yep.
including height and so,
Yes, and they asked the shortest president,
yeah,
and then DeAndre
Madison.
said, I'm short.
right?
And then you guys got into a bicep discussion.
I feel like he maybe beat me on height by a fraction of an inch.
He did.
But I suspect that,
I agree, but you did say in there he had bigger biceps, which I couldn't disagree with more.
okay, I think he was more cut, like more tone, I'm probably.
I agree with you, but yours are
Anyway.
bigger if we mentioned so.
All right,
So to go along with that, I thought the kids were engaged quite a bit. How many of the students did you think were not engaged?
So that's a class, it's a small class, I think we had 8 or 9.
Yep.
And not engaged at all, I would like to say 0. I think everybody was at least attentive. I honestly don't know how you gauge engagement for every kid, because in an era of differentiation, I think that there are students whose learning style is, look, I just want to quietly audit this, but I don't like to be called on. And I try to respect that for the most part. But sure, visibly, cosmetically, some more than others, for sure. And, total transparency, I'm 30 years into this gig, and I still don't know how you actively engage the passive student.
And then the questioning technique, like I kind of said because you're a storyteller, it's almost a discussion.
I like to think it was that.
Yep, and that's how I took it as. So,
Here.
do you ever specifically call on a kid? You didn't in the lesson, but that doesn't mean you
Yeah,
don't.
no, it's pretty rare. Once I get to know them better, if I've got a feel for a topic that they might be more inclined to respond knowledgeably about, I might try to tailor something to a kid. If somebody's completely dominating the discussion and others maybe don't have the chance to chime in, I might say, I think I do a lot more of somebody besides so-and-so rather than calling on somebody
Okay.
directly, so, yeah.
And then to go hand in hand with that, a lot of your subtleties, which people don't realize, the hand gestures. You did a nice job pointing to people, especially the girls, because the guys kind of dominated it. DeAndre got really
Yeah.
into it, especially when you did the presidency part and
Sure.
the Udon. But I think it was Madison. I'm
Yeah,
not
that
sure.
sounds right, yeah.
But she started to get engaged, especially when you talked about what's next,
Mhm.
a female president.
Mhm.
So I enjoyed that. I think your hand gestures and like talking to her made it easier for her
Okay.
to bring it out. So I enjoyed that too.
I'm not even really mindful of it all the time, but I suppose there is some, I'm kind of animated with that, sure.
Yeah, and that's what the difference between the lecturer and the storytellers. Lecture becomes boring, mundane.
Sure.
Right? That wasn't you at all.
I have had students tell me when I do my own sort of evaluation at the end of the year, go ahead and rate me, guys. They'll talk about little mannerisms and behaviors that I have, and that, you're right, now that you mention it, they do bring that up quite frequently, so, okay.
But it added to it though,
Good to
because you
know.
were just sitting there and then it was like bam, and we already talked about the biceps. So how often do you test? Now we talk about knowing the knowledge,
Yep.
how much is retained.
So as far as having them demonstrate, on an assessment beyond just active questioning in class, I give a test at the end of every unit, and it's always some combination of either multiple choice Regents questions from previous tests, or maybe an excerpt from a DBQ or a thematic essay. When I first started teaching, I think I had some more open-ended stuff. I think I maybe did some matching, some true false, but I'd say early on into my career, I figured, look, if the main gauge is this assessment at the end of the year, and not only they, but I am evaluated on that, I'm just gonna go to a completely Regents-based testing format. So it's once a unit, and it's usually some combination of multiple choice DBQ or thematic essay.
Where do you think, just to kind of piggyback off that, but you still use critical thinking?
I think that I think some of that, for every unit I do, and I don't know if you saw this in the packet that they filled out, there's a list of study questions, debate topic questions. I used to designate that as a review thing before they took the test, but in recent years, I feel like it flows more naturally if you just let it kind of come to you as you're going through the topics. And there was some of that in the one you observed, because, are there unofficial qualifications to be president? Think critically about it. Let's talk about why the taller candidate usually wins. In the modern era with television, why the more photogenic, attractive candidate usually wins.
Or you went with if women all voted together. I thought that was
Sure. Like the dirty little secret of politics. Yeah, women tend not to vote for women, right?
Mhm.
Because they're women. And that's presumptuous to think that they would, because politics matters, of course. But I'd like to think that that's observable critical thinking in the course of a lecture discussion. Could I go into more depth? Perhaps. Are there time constraints, related to Regents prep that preclude that? A little, but.
So I was going to say, because you're testing, right, with the DBQ or thematic, however basically the regions go, but I think you did a lot of critical thinking in the lesson with, what's next, a girl president, and then the identifying, you had an Asian in the room, an Asian president, and then saying another black president. It was nice to hear their talks on it. So I thought you did a lot of critical thinking actually within the story.
Oh.
So I don't think you need necessarily to make an assessment on it to ask the.
Good point, fair point, thank you.
Going through your lesson or your rubric, right? The one that I focused probably
Looks
the
fair,
most,
looks good, yeah.
3C,
Okay.
and that was your lowest mark for me. So I guess engaging student learning, which has kind of been the premise of this whole meeting.
Sure.
Obviously, 30 years in, content's not going to be a problem, right? You're going to know it. A lot of classroom management's not going to be a problem. So when we start looking at areas to get better or missed opportunities, I saw it in the student learning. I guess I wanted your feedback on how could that be improved, or maybe I just didn't see it in this lesson.
No, I think that's probably fair. I've never been somebody who seeks out engagement for engagement's sake. I want it to be natural, and I want it to just kind of kick in as a result of whatever the topic is, and I think some topics probably have kids more on the edge of their seat than others. I understand how the rubric works, and I know that that is a checkpoint in the rubric, and so I think a lot of teachers, when they're being observed, like consciously try to make sure they call on every kid, and I do that. Like if I'm doing sample questions before a test, we go around the room so everybody's got to do it. But yeah, I concede that engagement as defined by Danielson is probably not my strongest point, because I personally don't believe that cosmetic engagement automatically translates into learning. That said, sure, I'd like to have more student input, and it's actually more of a challenge in the 30-person class I have, just because of logistical reasons, numbers. As far as ideas on how to do that, I could probably come up with better prompts, or maybe just more prompts. I don't feel like I'm complacent or just like running out the clock on my career.
And I didn't think you did either.
No, and I wasn't suggesting that you thought that. I just that's something that as I get towards the end, I feel like I still don't have the answer. I don't know how you get the really passive kid to come out of their shell, and I'm not even sure if it's always a good idea to force that. And I do respect the, hey, I'm kind of quietly auditing this. I'm not sleeping, I'm not screen zombieing out, but engagement, I think, is different things for different people.
And do you think with the current region structure, we are getting the answers we need from that? Do you know what I mean? Because there's some kids that are just good test takers.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and I think that's a really good point to make. How can we design the test, and I know they're going in this direction, where it is more open-ended. It's kind of like critical thinking, higher order thinking, no one right answer. Maybe it's more divergent thinking, the heuristic over the algorithm. Cards on the table. They haven't done that with my test yet.
Not for 10 more years.
Right.
Yep, totally agree.
And I'm probably gone before they do that. Now, I still think it matters. I still think it's important, and I'd love to know like what's happening on global, to kind of grease the skids for kids that are coming up. But I always struggle with this because I feel like, all right, I want them to do more critical thinking. I want to go beyond just Regents content, but it's a balancing act.
There's
It's
a
a
lot of
huge
Regents
balancing
content.
act. Yep.
That's what you're measured
Yep.
on. So I'm with you.
Yep.
What opportunities do you think in the lesson was missed?
Okay, and this is why I tape a lot of my lessons, because I do like to go back and watch them and sort of assess myself. Look, I'm not ducking the question. I almost feel like that's something that the observer would know better than I would. And on some level, I feel like maybe the students would have a better gauge of that, like places they wanted to go where I didn't. And I don't mean this like, oh, I'm flawless, infallible, I can't improve. I just, do I dominate the discussion? Yes. Would I like it to be a little more, not 50-50, but like 60-40? Yes. Could I have perhaps used current events more, like the political climate that we're going through right now, a bit more? Yes, but I'm also trying to get them to think of the presidency writ large rather than just like the current administration. Could I have possibly put up a clip of something related to the Mueller investigation, or Ted Cruz and Rand Paul's actual filibuster? Maybe more of that would have enhanced.
So you said the
Because they're very visual. I
Yep.
think.
I thought the presidency C point you made was excellent.
All right.
And I think you brought up like Trump, and you made the joke like dumbest president,
Okay.
and then you just laughed and didn't say anything. But I thought like kids got where
Sure.
they were getting it, and I think the point you made with it is the polarizing figures between like
Right.
Obama and Trump.
Right.
And you were saying this isn't about the individual here. We're talking about the presidency as
The
a whole.
institution.
So I thought
Yeah.
that was excellent.
Okay.
The electoral college would have been opportunity missed, because you even said at the end, it's difficult, it's hard. You did a nice job recapping it, because I believe Madison again was the one who said, I'm still a little bit.
Yeah, and there's a more detailed, almost formulaic lesson I have that wasn't part of this. that explains, how the popular vote loser can win in some cases. I do have a separate lesson that I think lays that out a little bit more. It maybe just didn't fit as conveniently into this particular one, because I was sort of in between topics.
Yeah, because you started with,
Yeah, right.
because probably you'd like to spend a large majority of time on the
And
electoral
that might be a
college.
missed opportunity too. It's hard to compartmentalize with precision, because, because in part, if they are engaged, I do kind of want to run with that. a
Oh, yeah,
little
you
bit.
go off.
So, yeah.
What did I miss? Like, obviously, they had a rubric that I wasn't privy to, or
Yep.
I called it a study guide.
Yep, so there's a unit outline that is, for my benefit as much as theirs, it's just kind of like a sequence, and they can take notes or not, they can fill it in or not, the vast majority of them do. There are 2 optional homework assignments, essential terms and questions. We do sample questions before the test from previous Regents exams. I model how I would write a DBQ and/or a thematic essay related to whatever particular unit we're on. I do have some video clips, like on presidents, that we watch from time to time. But, yeah, look, the vast majority of what I do is what you saw. That is probably a solid 80 to 90% of how I disseminate the concept.
Okay, so then, within that, like I said, I don't think what you did was wrong by any means. I'm often a storyteller as well. I don't flex on people and do height stuff, but
Okay.
everything else. I would have said, like, with the
I'm
electoral.
very insecure.
Yes.
I just need that, I need that student validation. Okay.
The electoral college piece, I don't know, is throwing a group activity, or, because you started talking about like numbers with Hinsdale and you made the real world.
Yep.
Could you have had them in small groups, or do you think that's a waste of time?
So, no, I don't think it's a waste of time. I used to teach 7th grade, and I may have said this in the lesson. And when I had 7th graders, I would basically designate 2 kids to be candidates, and I'd do this thing with buckets and marbles. I don't think that was in this lesson.
No, it wasn't.
So buckets and marbles where, like, okay, here's a big bucket, it represents Alaska, but there are only 3 marbles in it, because it only has 3 electoral votes. Here's a pretty big bucket that's California, oh my gosh, it's got 55 electoral votes in it. And I would say, all right, here's an activity, and this was 7th grade, this was middle school, go get the marbles, first one to 270 wins. And I think that worked. Now, if I was doing that today, with the way it works now with swing states, I'd basically divide the group up into like Democrat or Republican and say, all right, you're the presidential candidate, you're the vice presidential candidate, you're a potential cabinet appointee, whatever. All right, you're the Democrat, here's New York, here's California, here's the Northeast ahead of time, you've already got like 230 marbles. Okay, you're the Republican, here's Texas, here's the entire Midwest and a big chunk of the South, so there's really only a handful of buckets left. Oh yeah, they're the swing states. Go get Michigan, go get Pennsylvania, go get Florida, go get Ohio. Like I could do something like
Yeah,
that in the
that's
form
good.
of an activity. I'm not saying that it doesn't have merit, I think it does, but it's something that I tended to do more when I taught the younger grades, so. And sometimes just explaining it to them means you don't have to actually do the activity. But I get that there are kinesthetic learners that want that.
The last question I have, so you stated the objective at the beginning. Do you ever think about writing it down so kids know, or is that what the study guide does? Because I didn't.
I mean,
wasn't privy
it
to
is,
seeing
it is, like the big picture stuff is designated in the unit outline I give them. I know that there is a school of thought that says like every day you put the main objective on the board so that there's like that focal point. I've never done that. I'm not saying I couldn't or shouldn't. Creature of habit, I don't know, but it's a fair point.
Yeah, the most interesting part, even for like this post-op, was just because what you do is effective. It was enjoyable, so I just wanted to hear your thoughts on some of my questions about the group, because I think the kids do retain. When the kids want to stand up in the middle of class and come to the front, or when they started getting the presidents down, and you make it so easy for a kid to be wrong but not feel like they're wrong, and that's tough to
That's
do.
good to know, yeah. I like that, yeah, I hope I'm projecting that or conveying that to them, sure.
Do you have any questions for me?
I don't know, how does this compare perhaps to other teachers you've seen?
Which has been me.
So, I mean, is your sense that most of the newer teachers tend to be more activity-based and less teacher-centered?
Yes, but I almost think that becomes kind of like lecturing becomes boring. So does 10 minute of instruction, group activity,
Gotcha.
exit ticket. I think that becomes very formulaic too.
All
So I
right.
don't think that's necessarily the best way. I think it's finding the pieces where you can engage. Now, I would say in yours, the presidency piece, that was engaging. Like,
Good deal.
if the kids weren't listening because of the gerrymandering, they were then getting it.
Mhm.
You know, with that part, and then I think that led into the electoral part, which you even said wasn't as exciting as,
That's the other thing too, like, I'll just tell them flat out, like, look, here's a topic that frankly doesn't have a lot of naturally engaging qualities, but, you know, we still have to go through it. So
Yeah.
saddle up, you know?
and you don't need to force group activity. I guess I was just wondering, where in your lesson does it naturally fit? Like, it seemed like the electoral college, as you were explaining that,
Yeah.
that would have been interesting.
Yep.
But maybe they already have it, I guess.
I'd like to think
tests will
so.
tell.
And I'm not anti-group work. I just, in a class that's really small like that already, there's only like 8 or 9 kids in there, I just feel like, you know.
There's an
we're-
intimacy, even
Yeah.
though where you sit and how you interact, that there's
Yeah.
an intimacy there that as soon as you do group work, you're now removing yourself from
I
that.
think so. So, and it might be a control thing on my part, I admit it. I have one other question for you.
Yes.
May I eat my lunch?
Yeah, we're all set.
Okay, thanks. All right.